Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Bullpen. In the Bullpen today, we have none other than John Hart, Republican strategist and co-founder and vice president of C3 Solutions. He's been a Republican strategist in the game a long time. John, good to have you on Indisputable. How are you?
I'm great, Dr. Richey. Thanks for having me.
Man, I got to tell you this, brother. I obviously know your work. You're more of a moderate Republican, but I don't even know if I like to use that word. You're more of a Republican that actually makes sense. Because there was a time when I could debate a Republican and at least I understood why they believe what they believe. Man, some of your colleagues on the right, brother, damn man, what has happened?
Well, it's a great question. I would say I'm not so much a moderate as I am moderate in manners, but very conservative in policy. I would describe myself as a constitutional conservative. I think the founders had a brilliant idea, brilliant experiment in government. And I think what's happened in our country is we've moved away from debates about ideas and positions to cult of personality. So I think on the right, we've put way too much faith in Trump, but people on the left to a lesser degree. But Bernie Sanders is a bit of a cult of personality figure. So I think that tribal sort of language is really dangerous. And I've done development work overseas as well in the Balkans. And so I think I'm watching the Balkanization of American politics. And so if that makes me a moderate, then I'm willing to say that I'm happy to be a moderate. But I would say I'm very conservative in terms of what public policy should be and what our direction should be for the country.
And I see that, and we're going to talk about some of that policy. I will push back on the Bernie Sanders reference. At least Bernie Sanders comes to the table with defined policies, even if you completely disagree with those policies. But you all have people on the right like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has been unable to articulate any policy. You have now Matt Gaetz, who has devolved into a rhetoric machine rather than a policy centric Republican and others. But you're right, there's this dependence on personality. And I teach my college students to never get fixated on the personality of any politician that you support. Because the name of the game for politicians is not personality, it's policy. And you have to connect with their policy agenda. If their policy agenda is adversarial to the community that you represent, well, that's not the politician for you, period.
You got it. Yeah, and I think with Gaetz, I think Gaetz is putting the party in Republican Party, and we need to be more about ideas and less about flash and substance and all that stuff.
Let me read something that you said, and I completely agree with this statement. You tweeted, "Conspiracy theories are a cancer for the GOP. The cause is Trump, whose childish meltdown after the election." And then it cuts off here, but I know your sentiment. Explain to us what you meant by it's all Trump, these conspiracy theories in your party.
Well, I think what Trump did after the election is what he should have done is take responsibility for losing the election. I mean, he got fewer votes than Joe Biden did in key states, and he is not president today, not because the election was stolen, but because he lost. And to invent a narrative that doesn't acknowledge that reality creates a huge setback and hurdle for people like me and others who are trying to advance conservative free market ideas in all areas, especially climate, poverty, upward mobility. And so I think that's what was so damaging and destructive about that. And so that's why I've been critical of him. But I've also praised him in areas where he did the right thing. I think he did some very good things in terms of growing the economy, increasing jobs for lower income minority populations. He actually reduced greenhouse gas emissions during his administration.
Well, let me push back on some of that.
His rhetoric was all over the map, but I think he accomplished a lot of really valuable things.
So John, let me push back a little bit on some of the policy issues, and then we'll get into climate change. While black people had more actual jobs under the administration, and by the way, it was trending in the right direction under President Obama. And if you look at your actual increase of jobs, President Obama saw the largest increase numerically than Donald Trump did. Trump actually, under his administration, slowed down that progress, but it continued to go in the right direction until COVID. Let's talk about black employment. While true, under the U3 rating system, more black people had technical employment than ever before, really, if you look at modern statistics. The issue with the U3 rating system is that it only configured every 30 days in the survey model if you had 1 hour of work in that 30-day survey. The U6 rating system provided context to that data and actually described if the work was part-time, seasonal, contractual, and did it pay the bills. And when you look at it from a U6 rating system, black unemployment and underemployment was still at 22% in the United States of America. But the administration, they decided to espouse the U3 system so that they could say technical employment means people are able to actually pay the bills, and that's not the truth. And listen, you're a data guy. You know what I'm saying is completely accurate. The other part of that is the reality of the DOJ under the Trump administration no longer prosecuting open discrimination happening in the workplace. That was a big mistake. Now, there was a real cause and effect dynamic from that policy. Under the Trump administration, black people started making less on the dollar from their white male counterparts, similarly educated with similar background. That number was moving in the right direction under President Obama because the DOJ said we're going to crack down on discriminatory practices. DOJ under Trump said we're not going to do that. And what happened? Employers took advantage of that, and you saw the disparity happen again, right? So we could talk about policy, and I know there are some things you agree with fundamentally, like deregulation. I just disagree with deregulation. We're never going to see eye to eye on that. But I do think we agree, we want more people working, but we also want more people being able to pay the bills. We want them to have jobs that pay the bills. Let's talk about climate change, because Trump, the way you characterize Trump, I agree with your sentiment, but I disagree with your diagnosis. I don't think Trump did it. I think Trump is a symptom. I think Trump is a product. Because before Trump, there was another big lie. And that big lie was President Obama was not born in the United States of America. That was the big lie. That predates Trump. And there was a big truth that John McCain, God rest his soul, RIP, John McCain actually wasn't born in the United States. He wasn't. It's on his birth certificate. But he had the military exception rule. But nobody made that an issue. But the guy who actually was born in the United States, they made an issue about that, and it came from the Republican Party. So Trump, he took advantage of a big lie, and he rode that big lie all the way into the hearts and minds of Republican voters. So do you agree that the conspiracy and the big lie and the tribalism actually predates Donald Trump?
Yeah, I do, but I think tribalism cuts across tribes. I don't think to sort of claim it originated from the conservative side is not true, or to say it only originated from the left is also not true. I think as a culture and as a country, we've lost connection with reality, and we live in what I call the age of unreason, where it's very, very hard to have respectful, common sense conversations about complicated issues like climate change. So it's highly polarized, highly politicized to a degree that's not helpful. Real debate is really is valuable. That's why the founders wrote the First Amendment. Way back in, John Milton wrote that whenever truth and falsity are allowed to grapple freely, whoever knew truth to be penned in a free and open exchange. So that conflict, that sort of that back and forth of ideas, what you're trying to do in your show, is really valuable because it gives people insight and it helps folks mobilize around public policies that are going to help the common good. And if the goal is just to shout and insult people and kind of just play to your base, that's not a very effective way to strengthen a democratic society.
Well said, John. Let me bring something to your attention. We'll talk about climate change now. 11% of conservative Republicans think that scientists understand climate change. Only 11%. I mean, that's staggering, man. Like 1 out of every 10 conservative, they actually believe scientists in this arena know what they're talking about. Let's contrast that. Among Democrats and independents who lean Democratic, 78% believe that scientists are on the right track. They also 80% believe it should be a top priority. This is an increase of 22% since 2016. So literally what you're seeing in the climate conversation, more left-leaning individuals are saying, okay, this should be a top priority, and it's getting higher as to those who agree we need to take it seriously. And then on the Republican side, it's moving in the wrong direction. Where is that coming from, and how do you address that inside of the conservative movement?
Well, yeah, I would say it actually is. It's moving in the right direction. When you look at what's happening in Congress now, Representative John Curtis of Utah just launched something called the Conservative Climate Caucus. So our organization, the Conservative Coalition for Climate Solutions, we deliberately put the word conservative and climate in the same place to tell people, if you believe this is a problem we should address, the best solutions, the best ideas are conservative free market ideas. So in the House, you have a caucus of over 60 members that have joined and made that statement and said, look, climate change is real. It's a global challenge. And so that's actually where it's headed. So there's a lot of other studies that have come out where particularly younger Republicans, they want dramatic action on climate change. And so the question is, well, what should that action be? And I think what's happened is the media does not reward, the political economy doesn't reward a healthy conversation about this. So for example, if somebody says, well, I have questions about the science, I'm not sure I understand it, they're smeared a denier, or you have to say the science is settled. Well, when you say things like the science is settled, that's not a very scientific claim, because science by definition is always unsettled. Now, that doesn't mean I believe climate change is real, but rather than asking these binary questions, what we need to do in the climate change debate is understand it's all about risk. We need to have a conversation about what are the risks and what can we do about it, and think of it as like a bell curve, where you've got the big hump in the middle. And this is what climate scientists actually say is there's a 90% chance we're going to have warming between 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius and maybe 5 degrees. So there's a 5% chance on either side. One side it means there's almost going to be no effect. The other side says there's going to be a catastrophic effect. But what happens is the 5% who say there's going to be no effect and the 5% who say it's going to be catastrophic, they hijack the entire conversation.
Yeah.
And so then people who have genuine curiosity, they're just trying to understand the science and the data. They don't know what to do. And so John, that's what I think that's what we're trying to get at.
Yeah, and I agree with your first statement about how basically it's not politically sexy. So if you have a real bipartisan, thoughtful conversation, that will not end up on Tucker Carlson's show. So the people on the far right would never respect that conversation, and he won't respect it either. And then those who are far left commentators would typically not highlight that as well. We will highlight it on this program because we lead with a policy first agenda. So we would highlight something that is good policy. Let's talk about policies as it relates to climate change. One of the greatest debates is if climate change is connected to man. That's one of the debates. So you will literally have some Republicans that say, oh yeah, I believe climate change is real, but I don't believe man has anything to do with it. And they'll point to like volcanoes and stuff, okay? So let's talk about why or how. Let me start with the how. How do you implement policy? What's your policy agenda as it relates to climate in America?
Well, that's a great question. Well, the best answer to that is free economies or clean economies. We just did a big report. Nick Loris, who was at the Heritage Foundation, we hired him to be our VP of Public Policy at C3 Solutions. Nick's paper looked at what's the Heritage's index of economic indicators that show what are the free economies in the world, and then we compared it to Yale's index of environmental performance, and we proved that the freer economies are twice as clean as the less free. So the phrase to remember is we are cleansed by capitalism. That when you have a free enterprise system, you're much more likely to have the innovations that are required to develop cleaner technologies that emit fewer CO2 emissions. Wait a minute. So that's what you're going to do. You want to have economic freedom is the answer. John. Not top-down central command and control economies.
Okay, so here's my pushback on that, brother.
Okay.
You're a Christian man, correct?
Yeah.
Your Christianity teaches, and I'm a Christian man also, that there's a cause and effect relationship with everything you do. Everything. You reap what you sow.
Right.
Okay.
And how do things help the least of these? That's another.
That's a fundamental tenet. Exactly. So let's stick to this one. You reap what you sow, meaning everything has a cause and effect relationship. Everything. If you're telling me that the pathway to a cleaner environment is to allow corporations to do what they want to do in their production and manufacturing, that violates the tenet of the cause and effect dynamic. Because while you have the theory that these entities will operate in good faith And because of the competitive market, they will find better ways to produce, cleaner ways to produce. I have a different theory. I believe they will find more profitable ways to produce and damn the waste that it takes to produce it. And the reason why I say that is more likely the practical application of a free economy or free market economy, as you suggest, is because historically, that's what they've always done. It is because of policy, regulation, and tort law why we have sensible regulations in place now. And you're telling me if you get rid of those things, that these companies will automatically start leaning toward a cleaner solution for their manufacturing needs. And I'm telling you, brother, they're going to lean to a profit, a bottom line solution to their manufacturing.
Well, I think what I'm offering isn't just a theory; it's a fact. And so I'm not suggesting, to be clear, that you get rid of all regulation. I think the regulations have to be limited. And some of the hallmarks of a free society and what we define as a free economy is where you do have the rule of law. You do have a system in place where there are regulations that can punish bad actors, but that you leave enough freedom to allow the good actors to innovate and develop new inventions. So a good comparison is look at when communism fell, okay, in 1991, the Berlin Wall came down. You had West Germany, West Berlin, East Berlin. There was the line dividing those two cities was not just a physical wall, but it was a line of soot. The East was dirty physically, the West was a lot cleaner. And the reason it was because of economic freedom, is that you had one side that had a freer economy, the other side had less free. Today, look at China. So today, the issue of climate change is increasingly an issue of China change. So China is literally cooking the planet, and they're producing far more CO2 than the rest of the developed world combined. So it's true that historically, the United States and other developed countries, we put a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere, but now it's China that is pushing us farther to a dangerous point. And so when you look at heat waves, when you look at
John, why is China the #1 violator? Answer that.
Why? Because they're a communist country that has a central command and control. They don't care about the people that they represent. Regime cares primarily about state and power.
They care primarily about their bottom line. You're right on the central regime part. They care primarily about their bottom line, and they do not care to regulate themselves into a profit loss. And because of the lack of regulation, and granted, they will have to regulate themselves, but because of a lack of regulation, you have China as the #1 violator on the planet right now. And how do you then conclude after that fact that somehow having other governments or structures of government allow for non-regulation? How do you not get to the same place that China is right now under non-regulation?
Well, here's a good case study. So in the United States, we have something called the National Environmental Policy Act. It's 50 years old, it's totally outdated. And because that's a regulation, and that most progressives say is a good regulation, that regulation is responsible for slowing the deployment of clean energy projects all over the country, often by 7 or 8 years. So if our goal is to quickly scale up, and another great example is nuclear energy. If we want to have more nuclear energy, that is the quickest, best emergency step we could take is to dramatically expand nuclear. We have to have a deregulation component. So again, let's go back to the bell curve, because there's 5% on either side of this question. Some people say we need to have total regulation. Other people say zero. I'm not saying we should have zero. I'm saying there's a sweet spot where you have to have regulation that limits and punishes bad actors, but keeps enough economic freedom in the system so that innovators, people who are good, well-intentioned folks that just want to create a new business, they're able to get their inventions approved and into the market as quickly as possible. And that helps everybody when we allow that to happen.
You know, the climate debate is a very nuanced discussion, because you're right. You have extremes on both sides. You have individuals who may be in the middle, but that middle is rarely defined, right? What policies can we actually agree with? Now, here's something, I say this at the end of my show. I tell people at the end of my show, every program, take care of this planet. Understand that climate issues, pollution, etc., it impacts urban communities first, right, and the worst. It hits those communities that produce me the hardest. And so I take this seriously, and it's not just a political talking point. So the question is, how, man, I'm still trying to get to the methodology place, because you make a lot of sense on some issues, and then to me, you make absolutely no sense when you go to a deregulated or deregulation standpoint. You actually use the example of a country that is operating without any regulation whatsoever and in violation of international regulations. They're operating in violation of those regulations, and you see what's happening. I don't think you can get to your conclusion or the stated conclusion that you proclaimed on the show by simply saying, let's be deregulated and allow the free market to take over. So what is the nuance, brother? What is the middle of the road? Help define that part on this show.
Exactly. So the answers are, first of all, you have to have lower energy prices for people who are in a tough spot. Yeah. So the Green New Deal, so I'll talk about why the Green New Deal doesn't work in order to explain what does work. So the Green New Deal approach is to essentially only address this issue in the context of the United States. Totally ramp up renewable energy, and I'm all for renewable. I live on a farm. I've got 62 acres. I want to put solar on my land. I'm all for that. I just planted 1,000 trees. All good things. Wind, good, great. Hydro is excellent, but we don't have enough land to actually do 100% renewable. So we have to have clean natural gas. So there's been no technology that's done more to reduce CO2 emissions in the past 20 years than fracking. So when the left says we got to follow the science, well, if you want to follow the science, you have to look at how hydraulic fracking and the natural gas revolution made our environment cleaner, because it displaced dirty coal burning with much cleaner natural gas. So cleaner natural gas is great for lower income communities.
Yeah.
Another thing that would be great is to reprioritize what we do in the federal government. So we can, I'm a big fan of recycling government waste. Like, let's get rid of the junk in the federal budget that does nothing to help people, and repurpose some of that to basic research so that we can develop.
Let me do this. I got 2 minutes left, brother, and I like a lot of what you're saying. Now, I've had the pleasure of reading the Green New Deal. Based on what you've said on the show, and based on me reading your background, I think you actually agree with 80% of the Green New Deal.
I agree. I agree with the aspirational goals, but I'll tell you very specifically what I don't like about the Green New Deal, and I'll actually read a section of it real quickly.
Okay.
So it says the Green New Deal, in order to do this, it requires the following goals and projects. And I'm looking at line O. It says we need to have high quality healthcare, affordable, safe, and adequate housing, economic security, clean air, water, healthy. So it addresses these other goals that have nothing to do really with a quote climate emergency. So think about the movie Armageddon. Remember the movie with Bruce Willis and Liv Tyler?
Right.
And so if we have an asteroid coming to Earth, what the Green New Deal does, it says, okay, we're going to launch the spaceship to go at the asteroid, but first we've got to go to Jupiter. We got to do this other project called universal healthcare. Then we have to go to Mars and terraform Mars, and we've got to have universal basic income, free college.
All right, so let me push back.
By the way,
we got 1 minute.
We'll come back, yeah.
Yeah, let me push you back on that. The Green New Deal is, as you say, aspirational. It is a theoretical political framework, basically, that is codified in writing. It is something that we look toward as a goal. You have actual policy dynamics inside of it, but you also have an expanded version of some of our more connected policies that we would like to see done in disenfranchised communities. I don't have a problem with that. And I think people get hung up on who supports the Green New Deal more so than looking at it policy by policy, line by line. You literally said on my show, from the energy policies that you support, you already have agreed to almost 80% of what's in it. Now, you may disagree with 30% vigorously, right? But you agree with a lot of it. I would dare argue most of it. And that's the part that the tribalism that you talked about, that's the part that doesn't get discussed. The Green New Deal has become a bad word to Republicans. How do you change that?
Well, I think we need to have our own manifesto, because the Green New Deal isn't just a framework, it is a manifesto. And I give AOC enormous credit for doing that. And I would call it a socialist manifesto, progressive manifesto, whatever term you like. But on the right, we need to do a much better job of describing what does our freedom manifesto look like. If we're gonna have the spaceship go at the asteroid, it's called economic freedom, and we need to do a better job of describing how that's gonna lift all boats, how it's gonna help people who are disenfranchised, because I'm convinced that it will.
Man, I'm flat out of time, brother. It has been a sensible, respectful, cordial conversation, and I appreciate that, brother.
I appreciate
you. Come back anytime, man.
You bet.
Okay.
Will do, sir.